What's going on, guys? Welcome back, and today I thought I'd make a part 2 to the 8 things I want to see from Studio Series video and incorporate some of your comments from that video into this one. But before we get started, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to everyone who watched, liked and commented on that last video. I didn't expect that video to do as well as it has, and all the support I received from that has gone a long way, so thank you all very much. But anyways, let's get straight into this, and we'll start off the list with number 1, more repaints. And so this is a part 2 to one of the points I made in the previous video, where I discussed some potential repaints I'd like to see, which basically involve doing repaints to either create new characters from other films, or make a version of a character fit for a different film. So for example, giving Ratchet a desert repaint for Revenge of the Fallen. This time I've created a list of a few character variants that could be made alongside a couple characters that we didn't see in the films, but we did get in previous toy lines, and so it would be a nice callback to those figures. So the list I've got is NBE1, which would be an iced out variation of Megatron from the first film to represent him being frozen in Hoover Dam. This figure could finally include Frenzy as a companion figure, and could have a more accurate chest, as the current Megatron from 2007 uses the same chest from his Revenge of the Fallen figure, and so it isn't entirely accurate to the film his design comes from. Battle Damage Jazz, which would be a callback to his deluxe from 2007, in which he looked how he did right before he died by Megatron's hands. They could even put some extra engineering into this figure and make it so he can split in half like his Masterpiece figure. Desert Brawl, which would be more of a callback to his older deluxe, which had a sandy colour scheme, and he actually did appear in the background of one scene in Dark of the Moon. Bayverse Cliff Jumper, which would be a red repaint of the 2007 Bumblebee, which again would be a nice callback to the deluxe from 2007. Bayverse Skywarp, which would either be a repaint of Starscream or Thundercracker in order to complete the Bayverse version of the main 3 Seekers. And finally, G1 colours. So for example, we could have a red Ironhide, a red and white Ratchet, and a G1 Devastator. I think we are likely to get most of these repaints, and I'd love for Hasbro to get creative with them. However, I think Hasbro should prioritise finishing off all the different characters before giving us these repaints, as these would be a nice added bonus after finishing off our collections. But now we move on to number 2, which is more remakes. And so this is the last part 2 point from the previous video, and for this one I just thought I'd name a few more characters that I think need remakes, as I forgot about them the first time around. And so these remakes are a Deluxe Sideways, which I think needs way better leg stability, as I find it is difficult to pose and get to stand. They could also add more spikes and such to be more accurate to his design from the film, however I was mostly happy with that figure apart from his legs. Then I've got a Deluxe Bumblebee, which I think could do with a better wheel placement on his backpack, and by this I mean that his wheels stick out quite a lot, and they're one of the only inaccuracies with this figure. If you take a look at his Deluxe from 2007, you'll see that they pretty much nailed the placement of the wheels, and if they could somehow rework his Studio Series figure to have that same configuration, then I think we'd have the perfect Bumblebee figure from the Bayverse. Next is Rise of the Beasts Air Razor, which could simply be made to represent her film design rather than her concept design. And finally I've got Rise of the Beasts RC, which I think should be made into a deluxe class figure, which would then help her to have a slightly bigger scale and a more accurate look in both modes. But these are just a few more remakes that I thought of after already making the first video, and so I thought I'd mention them here. If I think of even more figures that need remaking, then I might just make an entire video going over every single figure that needs remaking. But with that, we shall move on to number 3, which is better quality plastic. So I will give Hasbro and Takara credit in that the quality of plastic has gotten a lot better from the beginning of Studio Series to the current day. However, there are a couple more improvements I think they need to make. First is the usage of clear plastic, which I think needs to only be used for windows in vehicle mode, and that's it. They should absolutely stop using clear plastic for joints and hinges and significant parts of the figures. So for example, they used clear plastic for Mirage's arms, which eventually will wear away and snap off. I have several figures in which the clear plastic is starting to wear away, and it annoys me so much as some of these figures are amazing and I shouldn't have to feel scared to move them around. Next is the quality of some of the joints, and by this I mean that I have a few figures which have now gotten loose joints and connections between parts, even though I've barely done anything with them. I'm not too knowledgeable about the process of making these parts, however I would just like to see a bit more longevity in my figures. But with that, we shall move on to our next topic, which is number 4, the Commander class. So the Commander class is used for characters that are either massive or require a lot of budget. I think Hasbro really need to utilise this class a lot more in Studio Series, and I have a few characters that definitely need it in order to scale with the rest of the line and be as accurate as they possibly can. These are Stratosphere from Rise of the Beasts, Infernicus from The Last Knight, Dragonstorm also from The Last Knight, the Driller from Dark of the Moon, and they could also remake both Jetfire from Revenge of the Fallen and the Dinobots from Age of Extinction into Commander class. I think Stratosphere would be perfect in Commander class, and this is the most likely one to get this treatment, as many fans have been asking for him to be Commander class since we first saw him in the film. Infernicus and Dragonstorm make sense to be Commander class too, since they are large characters and they are combiners, which means that we could have the individual bots released separately in their correct size class, and then a Commander class released for the fully combined mode, just like they did with Devastator. As far as the Driller goes, I highly doubt we would get this figure, as he doesn't transform in the film and he's way too big to have a figure that looks right next to the others. However, I thought I'd mention him anyways, as it would simply just complete the Dark of the Moon line. As for Jetfire and the Dinobots, this would just be an upscaled version of the previous figures, as I think Grimlock and Jetfire are perfectly fine as they are. They just don't scale exactly like they did in the films, but I will admit that I'm not holding out hope for Hasbro to do this one either. There are probably many more characters that could potentially get Commander class treatment, especially when it comes to the 86 and Gamer Edition lines. However, since I mostly collect live action figures, these are the ones that come to mind for me. Next up is number 5, vehicles and playsets. So, throughout the films we see many ships and vehicles that the Transformers use in battle, and so I think it would be a cool idea for Hasbro to make these into sets so that we can really have everything from the films in our collection. Now, granted, some of these vehicles are far too big to be in scale correctly with the characters, however I still wouldn't mind having them in my collection. I will also say that Hasbro could get creative with these. For example, we could have the Decepticon drones from Dark of the Moon transform into the ships, or we could have drones that combine into larger ships like the Ark or the bigger Decepticon ships from Dark of the Moon. I highly doubt we will get these, and if we do, it will be right at the end of the line once we have received every possible character we could get, but I still think it's worth mentioning as it would just complete the collection. So moving on to number 6 now, and this is expanding to all of the films. So, Studio Series is clearly based purely on the Transformers films rather than the TV shows, with it focusing on the Bayverse, the Reboot universe, the 86 film and Transformers 1. However, there is one more film missing here, and that is Transformers Prime Predacons Rising. And I just want to quickly mention that this section is inspired by a comment on my previous video from Stormfox, where they mentioned that they would like to see the characters from this film made into Studio Series, and I fully agree and would also love to see this too. I think Hasbro could easily make Studio Series figures of characters from that film without feeling the need to do the rest of the show and then all the other shows, as they have separate lines where they do that. This would allow us to get accurate representations of these characters and fresh molds for all of them, and I think a lot of people would buy these, as Transformers Prime is pretty universally loved by fans, and I'm sure they would all love to get these characters in Studio Series form. I also think this is the best way of doing this without upsetting fans of the other shows, as Hasbro would just be focusing on that film rather than the rest of the show, and so we wouldn't get characters like Arachnid or Breakdown, as they obviously don't appear in the film. As much as I think this could work and would love to see this, it doesn't seem like something we'll get anytime soon, as we are currently getting Prime characters in the Legacy toy line, and I think adding them into a Studio Series might get too confusing at the moment. But anyways, we now move on to number 7, characters that didn't appear in the films. So in some of the previous toy lines for the live action films, we had several characters which didn't appear in the film or even get concept art for the film be made into figures with their own molds by using vehicles that were seen in some scenes. Some of these figures were Longarm, Landmine, Stratosphere, Rollbar, and Vacon from Age of Extinction. I think it would be great to get more of these types of characters in Studio Series, as it allows us to collect these vehicles, and it also allows us to get even more characters in our collection. Some examples of other vehicles that could be given a robot mode and made into figures are the McLaren from The Last Knight, Cade's truck from The Last Knight, the van that the humans drive in Age of Extinction, the Ospreys from Dark of the Moon, and many more vehicles seen in the background of some scenes throughout the films. I really hope that Hasbro considers making some of these into figures, as the vehicles would look amazing, and I'm sure they could get creative with the robot modes since they don't have to stick to an already made design. I think Hasbro could even make a separate line in Studio Series dedicated to these types of figures, or just add them into the concept art line in order to fill it out more. Whichever way they do it, I would certainly buy every single one of these for sure. But with that, we have reached our final topic, which is number 8, Cybertron/Comic Edition. So there are loads of Transformers comics that have some excellent stories in them that I would highly recommend everyone to go check out. And so for Studio Series, I think we could get a comic edition that's similar to Gamer Edition in concept. I think this would allow us to get figures like the Cybertronian versions of the Bayverse characters seen in those comics, and also characters that only appeared in the tie-in comics like Astro Train and Cosmos. We could also see this develop into the IDW comic series, which I think would be amazing. But anyways guys, that is 8 more things I want to see from Studio Series going forward, and I will admit that this list is more of a reach than the previous one. However, I would still definitely like to see all of these things covered in one way or another by Hasbro in Studio Series. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you have any other things that you would personally like to see from Studio Series, then make sure you comment them down below, as I'd love to hear your thoughts and hopes for this line and discuss them with you. But apart from that, make sure you like and subscribe to see more content based on Transformers, and I will see you later.